Thank you, Linda, and thank you everyone for being here. It's good to be together and have a chance to talk about some basic biblical Hebrew in accordance Bible software. As the title suggests, I am not assuming much of any proficiency in the Hebrew language for this webinar. So if you've got it, great. If you don't, you'll be able to follow along just fine. I am assuming at least a basic working knowledge of accordance. But even if you've only been using it for a couple months or shorter than that, you ought to be able to follow along. We start at a fairly basic level and progress as the webinar goes on. As Linda mentioned, the material available, you can find it under the materials section of your go-to training panel. Just click on the hyperlink and you'll see this PDF, which has an outline of what we'll cover today. We'll start with just an overview of some biblical Hebrew resources in accordance, and then we'll get started with the Hebrew Bible in accordance. We'll do a basic word study. We'll go deeper with word studies, and then I'll talk about how to save your workspace. Once you've done a few operations and gotten a setup that you want to make sure you don't lose, how do you keep it and access it again in the future? So that's what I plan on doing. I will make sure that there's ample time for questions. After each of these numbers, I'll stop for questions. If you've got something that can't wait, you can feel free to just put it in the chat box, and as Linda said, we'll make sure we pick those up. But especially after each of these numbers, I'll make sure to stop and take any questions so that it can be an interactive webinar. I am concerned less with getting through the material, so to speak, and more that you walk away with a greater understanding of how to access Hebrew resources in accordance and how you can put them to use for you as you seek to expand your knowledge of the biblical Hebrew language in particular. So with that said, let's begin. I wanted to do an overview first of what biblical Hebrew resources there are in accordance, and focusing especially on Bible texts, grammars, and lexicons. Now I'll be showing you each of these actually in accordance itself, but let me just show you in the store where you can find these. If you go to accordancebible.com/store, you're going to see on the left sidebar here a number of options. Hebrew Studies, this is an expandable and collapsible triangle, disclosure triangle. Underneath, you've got a number of subcategories that you can look at. If you go to Hebrew Texts, you will find that Accordance has not only the Hebrew Bible itself, but it has other offerings such as Dead Sea Scrolls, which I guess includes some Hebrew Bible and then some what's considered extra biblical literature. There's a Hebrew New Testament available. You can get inscriptions. As far as learning biblical Hebrew, those who take it seriously want to go further afield just beyond the so-called Old Testament itself to look at other uses of Hebrew in a similar time period. So you've got these resources such as inscriptions. There's the Mishnah, some other rabbinic resources available to you. Actually, quite a bit. Accordance is ahead of the game as far as what other Bible software companies have to offer when it comes to Hebrew resources. So you can simply check that out in the store. If you wanted to get right into the Hebrew Bible itself, which is the focus of today, you could simply click on Hebrew Bibles, and that's going to narrow your search down to the options shown here. And we'll talk through a little bit some more of these later on. Hebrew lexicons or dictionaries are also available. You've got the BDB, Brown, Driver, Briggs Hebrew lexicon available both in abridged and complete form. There are some word study options available to you. These in particular, this complete word study dictionary might be helpful for somebody with limited knowledge of Hebrew. Somebody who's got at least a semester or two is going to want to use something like the Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, or its larger counterpart, the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. You can see the price point difference here. Concise is $60, $350 for the larger 8-volume set, which on a bookshelf takes up quite a bit of room. It actually covers more than just the Hebrew Bible in terms of the body of literature that it addresses. But this is a page that's worth spending some time on, and again, we'll look at a couple of these today. So lots of lexicons, whether it's at a basic level, intermediate, or even a more advanced level. You've also got this new International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis, which is going to take you beyond not just how a word is used and how in other contexts, but what is, it's got more interpretive suggestions here in this particular lexicon. So you could spend some time on that. There are lots of grammars available too, whether basic or more advanced. Many folks learning Hebrew, particularly in a seminary setting, may be familiar with Basics of Biblical Hebrew Grammar. That's the grammar I used, Pratico and Van Pelt. There's the First Hebrew Primer, which is an interesting resource that has not only the textbook itself, but it's got the answer key and an audio companion. If you were teaching yourself Hebrew and using this resource, you can hear it spoken. It says it's got over an hour of spoken lessons. Lots of different features here that you could check out. And then some other more advanced grammars. You've got the Waltke O'Connor Introduction to Biblical Hebrew Syntax, itself a very thick volume, which leaves very few details uncovered. So again, you can consider this as you're learning Hebrew if you find it helpful to have a grammar companion available in accordance. There are some who advocate learning simply in print, maybe think that the screen is too distracting, but I'm not convinced that that's the case. So depending on if you're taking a course or you just want to dive in on your own, you have a couple of different options available to you here. And let's move in now to what some of these look like in the library. Now, again, I'll keep this very brief. But anything in accordance is going to be keyed to, I'm sorry, let me just pull up Waltke and O'Connor here. Here it is. Anything like this grammar in accordance, and this is a more advanced grammar, but it's going to have a number of search fields so that you can search a grammar by section number, English content. So maybe you want to look up the word noun, or you want to look up imperative or something like that. You could simply search by English content. You could search by Hebrew content. So if you've got a particular Hebrew word that you want to look up, you could search any grammar, whether this more advanced one or a basic one, by Hebrew word. You can even search it by Greek in this one. You can also search by scripture. That's especially helpful if you're reading through a passage of the Hebrew Bible and you want to see, well, what does this grammar have to say about Genesis 1 or Isaiah 53 or something like that. You can also search by page numbers if you see a page reference somewhere and need to look it up that way. You can also expand here in the toolbar. Again, this will be basic for those of you who use Accordance, but you can expand the toolbar to get what is essentially a table of contents so that you could simply browse through this way and see what the different chapters are and quickly navigate to a section or a subsection that you wanted to see. So lots of good resources available in Accordance. I want to move into actually getting started with the Hebrew Bible itself and instant details, cross-highlighting, all that good stuff, but I do want to pause there and see if there are any questions that folks have so far just with this kind of little bit of content that we've started with.
Keith has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Keith.
Hey, did you recommend a specific lexicon? And I mean, I just got here a few minutes ago, so I mean, I might have missed it, but.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just very briefly, I think, and I'll answer that in a little bit more detail now. I think it depends on sort of your trajectory. If you are pretty sure you're not going to have time to learn Hebrew, but you want to be able to access the Hebrew that an English Bible or a Spanish Bible or whatever is translating, then you might want to use something like one of these word study dictionaries. However, the best way to to know Hebrew is to actually learn the language. And so if you're somewhere on that trajectory and you've either committed to it or you know you're going to, the Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew is a good one. Its larger counterpart, as I said earlier, is this Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, but this concise one, especially just for getting a basic lay of the land, and here, I'll pull that up. Well, actually, let me put that off because I will talk about lexicons later. So I'll do a case study with this particular lexicon.
Right.
So that's a good one to get, and then kind of what's been used in scholarly circles, at least the ones that I've interacted with, is the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, five volumes there. So that might be one if you want longer article entries and lots of cross references. That would be a good one to consider.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure thing. All right. Well, let's jump in and let's open up a text. There are thinking especially of the Hebrew Bible in accordance. There are two sort of main texts that cover all of the Hebrew Bible. There's this. It's called HMT, the Hebrew Masoretic Text, and it's got a more up-to-date morphology. And simply what that means is it gets corrections more frequently and is more up-to-date in terms of when you hover over a word, what parsing you get. So there's the HMT W4, Westminster 4 Hebrew Bible Masoretic Text. There's also the BHS, which it's a small cover here, but this brownish cover may be familiar to anyone who has used this text critical edition. This is a version of the Hebrew Bible that has these sigla. So if you hover over this A here, you're going to get some text critical notes. Notes that detail what other manuscripts read, whether those are other various Hebrew manuscripts or the Greek Septuagint or the Syriac. There's a whole sort of set of abbreviations and symbols for which you're going to want this BHS guide and other resources to help decipher that. And that's not really the focus of today's session. It is just to say these are sort of your two primary full complete texts of the Hebrew Bible, this HMT, which is what I'll be using, and then this BHS if you want this critical apparatus down here in the instant details. As you can see, it's basically telling you in this cryptic, sometimes abbreviated Latin, here is what this manuscript says for this word, or here is an alternate reading, or here is what the scribe we think was saying. It's not terribly editorial. It tends to be sort of just based on textual evidence, but occasionally you'll get some suggested readings from the editor of that particular book. So again, VHS comes with this apparatus here, and again you could just open that separately as its own thing. So if you wanted to go to the apparatus for Genesis 1:1, you could pull that up and just see these different notes here. You could open that in parallel with this if you wanted to, but for the purposes of today we'll use HMT W4, the Hebrew Masoretic Text, which is shown right here. So let's get started with that, and instant details. Again, I suspect anyone who's used Accordance for more than a couple of days will be familiar with this, but I do just want to highlight how quickly you can pull up various information in the instant details. Let me just go ahead and open up an English parallel here. Text English, and let's do the NRSV with Strong's. All right, so now we've got English and Hebrew together. When I hover over a Hebrew word, so bara, create, I get some parsing information. That is the CalPerfect third masculine singular, and it tells me, gives me a gloss or a short definition. I've got a syntax module installed that tells me how it's functioning in the sentence. It's the predicate or the verb. It is the thing that is said about God, Elohim, Barat, that He created. So all of that information comes to you through the instant details. You can change the font size of the instant details as necessary. You can even go into your preferences and customize what shows in your instant details by simply going to Accordance, Preferences, Instant Details. And I won't spend time on these details unless you have questions about them, but there are a number of settings that you can adjust, including what is shown for the Greek and the Hebrew. Perhaps you want to make sure you're seeing the English transliteration there, which was not there before, and maybe you don't care about word syntax, and you don't really want the root form or the lexical or the inflected. Maybe you just want some grammatical details. Now what's showing in the instant details is going to change. So you're going to get the transliteration. So this is especially helpful if you have so little Hebrew that you're still working on the alphabet, and so that these characters themselves are kind of perplexing to you. You can get the English transliteration there, as well as the part of speech and the English gloss. But again, all of that is customizable through the preferences, and you can set that up however you like. One really neat thing that was one of the first things that I appreciated about Accordance, not only can you change the instant details, what displays, but you can also change what shows when you have a parsing shown for you. In other words, what is the order of display for things like class, STEM, aspect, person, gender, number, state, other, so on and so forth. This wasn't actually important to me until I had about a semester or two of Hebrew, and I got used to the Pratico Van Pelt explaining a verb using certain terminology in a certain order in terms of how it was parsed. Well, you can just drag and drop this and rearrange this how you want to in accordance. So that's particularly helpful. You can see you do that in Greek too. I'm used to tense, voice, mood, person, gender, number, but if you were used to person, number, gender, you could just adjust that and it's going to show in that order in your instant details. So it does not force you to learn accordances system. You can basically, depending on the grammar that you've used, you can basically set it up to be how you want it in the instant details. You'll also notice, and again, this is a basic feature of accordance, but worth not taking for granted, that there is cross-highlighting. And so if you've got a Hebrew text and an English text open, and in fact, let's go ahead and open that BHS text as well, the one that has the apparatus. So cross-highlighting is going to take place when you hover over a word. And when I am at the word formless, I'm not clicking at all. I'm simply just hovering my mouse over it, my cursor over it, and it shows me tohu in both of my Hebrew texts here. In fact, I don't think there are very many consequential differences between these two Hebrew texts. If there are, I think they're just ones of spelling. So you're going to see the word highlighted both in English and Hebrew as you go through. So again, whether you're starting from English and you want to work sort of backwards, so to speak, and see, okay, what is the heavens in Hebrew, you can just hover over heavens and your Hebrew text will show you Hashemayim. Or you could be starting from your Hebrew text and maybe you got stuck on Penei Hamayim or something like that, and so you can see that that means face of the waters. So that cross-highlighting feature is really handy, and it will work even if you have 5 or 6 different translations open. If you wanted to open up another English text, for example, let's look at KJV with Strong's. That's going to cross-highlight there as well. And where this gets to be particularly useful is in the instance I'm showing you right now, where you see Ruach for Spirit of God in the King James. The NRSV has a wind from God. And of course, immediately you get into a potentially theological issue, certainly an issue of meaning and understanding. And so you could open up 4 or 5 other translations, and very quickly, just by hovering and accessing this cross-highlighting feature, you could see how do the different translations, English translations, or you could add a Spanish translation or another language, how do they render this Hebrew word here? So that's cross-highlighting in accordance. Very helpful when you just quickly want to have 2 texts side by side and see how the English translates the Hebrew. Let me just spend a moment, and I'll pause for questions in a minute here, but I want to highlight on this handout. If you click on this, I made it a tiny URL, but it expands to a help file in accordance. This explains what is called a keyed Bible text in accordance. And again, especially if you're in your initial stages of learning Hebrew, you could find this useful. As it says here, a key number text identifies the original Hebrew or Greek word behind the English translation. So you have these for the Hebrew Bible and also the Greek New Testament. And it says it also lets you access original language resources without knowing either Hebrew or Greek. And I'll show you in a little bit when we get to word study how to do that. So in other words, you can basically look up a Hebrew word in a Hebrew lexicon whether or not you know Hebrew. Accordance makes it very easy to do that. You can even look up a Hebrew word from an English text, and I'll show you how to do that. But the way that this happens is through these keyed Bible texts. Strong's is sort of the one that's been used for a long time, and now there's another keyed Bible text that Accordance has. You might see this GK numbering, Goodrick and Kohlenberger. That's very similar, but it basically puts a word, it gives it a key number so that it can link a Greek or a Hebrew word with the underlying English and basically make word study easy whether or not you know the original language as well. So that's a keyed text, and how you know it in Accordance is it either has this S, well actually this spells it out and says Strong's, but it might be listed as NRSV S, or let's find another example. Well, here it expands it, I guess. NASB with Strong's, JPS, Jewish Publication Society with Strong's, and ESV with Strong's. You might see something with GK numbers. That's the same sort of thing. It's just a different numbering system, but it's the same sort of keyed text. If you were to open something without it, like this NIV 2011, for example, you're actually not going to get the cross-highlighting. And you'll see I'm highlighting here. Nothing's going on over here. That's because it's not a keyed text. It hasn't been keyed with either the GK numbers or the Strong's numbers. So for the cross-highlighting to work and the word studies to work that I'm going to show you later on, you want to make sure that you have something with GK numbers or with Strong's. And let's get the JPS translation open here as well. One more thing I'll show you, and I'll pause for questions. You can also access the interlinear view. There are many learners of languages who are strongly opposed to interlinears. I think once you get a semester or two in, it's probably best to limit your use to them, but they are helpful learning aids for some. So I want to show you how to use this. Simply go to the gear icon, click on Show Interlinear, and you're going to get a number of things showing underneath your word. And so, Bereshith bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. With this short verse, you're going to get, this is the strong number right here. You're going to get the lexical form, so when it's not inflected or conjugated, what is the word, and then the part of speech. All of this you can customize. I'm sorry, that's the wrong place. Let's see here. Set text plain display. I'm sorry, I'm going to the wrong place again. You can tell I don't use interlinear very often. Here we go. It's this, this notebook drop down, and there are a number of settings available here. You can do the key number, the lexical form, the part of speech, the tag, the gloss, the syntax. So for example, and I'll pause in just a moment for questions here. If you were to click on lexical transliteration, perhaps you want to see in English lettering what is this Hebrew word here. You would simply go to the drop-down menu and customize to your heart's delight. So you can make this as simple or as complicated as you want. And also use this as a springboard for word studies, which I'll show you in just a minute. But yes, I do want to pause now and take any questions that folks may have so far.
Mark, how did you get to the interlinear, please?
Oh, I'm Abram, but I'm happy to show you.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So you start from your text and you go to this gear icon right here.
Okay.
It's very small on my screen probably, but and you can either show or hide it.
Okay.
And then once you've shown it, you go to this. It looks like a notebook icon, and here are the options that you can you can play with.
Thank you.
And so sure, no problem. And so just again, if I were to uncheck everything, I can just show this at its most basic. In fact, so here's one interesting option. This might even be a good way to use an interlinear. I remember I wasn't able to finish this class due to time constraints, but I started an intermediate Hebrew grammar course at my seminary, and to my surprise, the professor wanted us to learn transliteration, which I thought was maybe a more basic thing, but it actually turns out it's not. Transliterated Hebrew, at least for me, is difficult. But there's value in reading it, particularly with older scholarly resources when typesetting was such a challenge that it was just transliteration. They maybe didn't even bother with Hebrew font or typesetting. So there are certainly scenarios where transliteration is helpful. And this is an interlinear showing only transliteration. In fact, you could use that if you wanted to make sure you weren't relying on English too much, but you were working on your transliteration. So there are actually a number of tasks for which you can use this interlinear feature here.
Is that transliteration or is that just pronunciation? The class that I'm taking, that is not transliteration because it doesn't show any of the lines or
right, the points or the vowel pointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the transliteration, and it's so the well, that's actually. Let me look. Well, at this word tohu, for example, here, you've got the o vowel and the u vowel both included here in the transliteration. So that's a full transliteration, which will help you with
they're included in the letters.
Right.
we're required to know when to mark them and when not to mark them, and when to put the schwa,
Shiva, yep.
todo esto. So, okay, thank you. Good enough.
Yeah, so for pronunciation, I'm not sure that the transliteration is necessarily going to be that helpful. Here we go. This might help a little bit. So there's both the lexical transliteration and the word. Here's the one you want. You want the word translation. So there you go. I had it on the lexical.
Okay, very good. Thanks. I'll check the list of things in there.
Yeah, and again, I think for folks who have already committed to learning the language, unless you've got someone requiring you to, I wouldn't spend much time with an interlinear, and I wouldn't even spend a whole lot of time with transliteration necessarily, and again, unless it's being asked of you. But yeah, the pronunciation is going to be more important, and if you're in a classroom setting, all the better. If you're not in a classroom setting, something like that first Hebrew primer that's got some audio files can be particularly helpful.
Very good.
Any other questions before we move on to word study?
You mentioned a syntax module.
Uh-huh.
Is that something you have to add in?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
I'll show you what it looks like. Yeah, that's available in the store. It's an excellent resource. It takes some learning. So it's basically, I mean, you can think about the sentence diagram is not quite the way of referring to it. These are syntax trees. And so they show you not the part of speech per se, so much as how the part of the word or sentence is functioning in the phrase and in the clause. And so so here you've got the the is just a conjunction, and the ha is a specifier. That's what's in parentheses here in my instant details. But you could also hover over the abbreviation here in your syntax module and see it in the instant details. But as you can see with this visual representation, it does help you to see how the elements of a phrase or a clause are grouped together.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before we move on to word study? All right. Well, as I've written here in the handout, basic principle about word study is just to realize that the meanings of words are determined by their context. And so you might even have the same, and this is true in any language, you might have the same word spelled exactly the same, and it's the same root and everything, that has a different shade of meaning or a different nuance depending on the context that it's used in. And so there have been even whole books written about what's called a word fallacy, or some sort of misunderstanding how words work, or this word meant this one thing in this context, so therefore it must mean the same thing in every other context it appears. Well, that's not true. Your best guide for what a word means is reading it in context. So let me show you how you can do that, both from a Hebrew text and an English text. From an English text, and this is kind of a neat feature of these keyed texts that we talked about. I'm reading in the JPS version. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Now, if I'm interested in this word darkness, there are a number of ways that I can search for it, and I'll just show you from the English first. So I can see the choshek that it translates in the Hebrew just from the cross highlighting. We talked about that before. If I right-click on darkness and go to search for word, I'm going to find, and let me drag this over so we can see it side by side with our Bible texts. I'm going to find every time the JPS translation has the word darkness or dark, something related to dark or darkness. I could simply open back up my Hebrew Bible and utilize the cross-highlighting function as I go through dark. But I quickly realized that darkness here, here's hahoshek again, but here's dark, and there is a different Hebrew word here So this is where Accordance distinguishes between a couple different kinds of search. If I want actually the word darkness or dark in the English Bible, I need to go to search for word. But if I want this Hebrew word, hahoshek, in my English translation, so in other words, I want to know how is this word translated every time it's used, I need to do a different search, which is search for key number. So that's where it's going to automatically pull up. That's key H2822. Of course, you don't need to know that, but that's going to show me then more specifically that particular Hebrew word translated, all the different times it's translated. And in fact, you may find that there are times where it's translated into a different English word. That might not be true with this example, but that theoretically could be the case. Here we go. Psalm 88:13. We'll put the Hebrew Bible next to it, and you'll see here, are your wonders made known in the netherworld? Here's the same Hebrew word we've been looking at, but it's translated with a different English word. So that's search for word, which again gives it to you how it's translated in English, versus search for key number, which is basically like doing a Hebrew search. But what's neat about this is you could do this without any knowledge of Hebrew, simply by utilizing this key number feature in Accordance. Now, if you wanted to look up in a Hebrew lexicon, let's get to a different passage here. Let's go to Genesis 12:1. Given my name, you can see why this is a favorite passage of mine. Okay, the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land I will show you. If you wanted to look up Eretz, simply from your Hebrew text, you can triple click on this, and it will open up your default Hebrew lexicon. For me, I've set that as the Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. And that's going to take me right to that entry. Again, if you know Hebrew, you're simply reading the Hebrew text and triple clicking. Even if you don't, if you had been looking at these two texts in tandem, you could move from the English to what it cross highlights and triple click. Typically, as a general rule, you're going to get a whole lot more information about a word from a Hebrew lexicon than you would something like a key number dictionary or something like that. So regardless of your level of comfort with the Hebrew language, you can get into these Hebrew lexicons from the Hebrew text by triple clicking. You can change in preferences under Amplify what your triple click default is. So I could make my default triple click dictionary any one of these, and it would simply follow me when I triple click on any word. You can adjust, once you're in a lexicon, by the way, you can adjust the search field and run your own searches. So if you wanted to look up a scripture, so you've got this open and you just wanted to see, does this Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew have any mentions of Genesis 12:1? Well, in fact, it does. Here are 3 exact hits, and it lists it here in red, and using the hit button, you can navigate down to see any other words that might be listed there. This actually is a springboard for going deeper into word study, but I do want to pause again and see what questions folks have so far on anything we've covered.
Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any, Abram.
Okay, great.
I do. I had to get to the microphone.
Okay.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I just had I have the BHS in Accordance, and I tried typing in, and I got letters in Hebrew. Now, I need, where do I, when I typed, that was because I was typing words and not verses. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yes. All right. Things are clear. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, good. Excellent. Very good. All right, well, let's go a little bit further with word studies. So you can triple click on any word, and let's just stay, I mean, this is a Hebrew webinar after all, so let's just stay with the Hebrew for a minute. You can triple click on any word in your text to open up your lexicon. And again, I showed you how you might change that. anyone, again, who has used Accordance for more than a little while knows that one of the beauties of the program, as you would hope and expect, is that everything, well, most everything is hyperlinked. So if you didn't know what VB stood for in the Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, here it is in the instant details, verb, or perfect, or imperfect, and verse references, 1 Kings 21:7. So if you wanted to see sort of at a glance how asa is used throughout the Hebrew Bible, you could hover over these hyperlinked scripture references and find those in your instant details. You could even, if you wanted to stay all Hebrew, you could change the display version in the preferences so that what was showing down here was your Hebrew text, so that as you're hovering over, you're still just seeing Hebrew, so you can see the actual word in context. Let's say, though, that you need to go deeper than just one lexicon, and if you're doing a serious word study, of course, that will probably be the case
Abram,
sooner or later. Yeah.
There's a question between Strongs and Mounts. Do you have a preference?
Personally, that's a good question. I might prefer the Kohlenberger mounts simply because, well, here, let me just, the main reason why I like it is over Strong's is that it has, you've got the frequency information right away here, which I don't know if Strong's has that. I don't use it enough to know offhand. But it also, the Kohlenberger mounts has these kind of pre-programmed searches here so that you can look up, let's take the word Adam, you can look up how the NIV, ESV, and all these languages, or all these translations translate that word in all of its uses. So just by clicking on ESV, I'm getting all of the, see, ESV is going to give you mostly man. NRSV is going to give you a lot more humankind because they have sort of different concerns with how they translate gender. But I like the Kohlenberger mounts because not only do you get the frequency count and a concise definition, but if you're going to do word searches, particularly in English, you get these hyperlink searches already set for you. So I think that makes it a little bit easier personally. My own personal preference, and I think this just has to do with having done enough Hebrew, is to use a kind of full-on Hebrew lexicon like Dictionary of Classical Hebrew or the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon that we looked at in the store. A good question. All right, so the task now, let's go to Micah 6:8, and let's say you want to look at the word good, tov. Again, triple click, and that's going to give it to you in your default lexicon. But if you wanted to look up that word and do a more serious word study, this would maybe be a good one because we're getting, well, actually here it splits it up into a couple different entries here. But that's a word I think that would be worthy of further consideration. And so you simply go to right-click on the word, and then you go to Research. And Accordance 11 organizes your library. It basically curates it, and you can change these categories. But you simply click on Research, Hebrew Lexicons, and in the blink of an eye, it's going to pull up all of the lexicons that you have in your library and look up that word for you and put them together into a list of entries. Now with each of these, if you click on More, you can see the rest of that paragraph, or if you want to go deeper, click on Open, and now you're going to get the full entry. You can move this window over here so you have more room. You're going to get the full entry. That's what Halot has. If you wanted to see what the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew had, simply click on Open, and now that's going to give it to you in a new tab. Maybe you want the Kohlenberger mounts. And so having just done the single right click, now from your research search, you can look at the dictionary entries for these three different lexicons all side by side. And depending on how big your screen is and what your browser will let you do, you can put these into a different arrangement so that you're quickly accessing multiple lexicons on one word. There used to be well, there still is a way to do this. It's a little more complicated, and I'll show you if you're interested. But I can just tell you that before this research function in Accordance 11, you could link your lexicons together so that you could basically have a window like this. And let's say these are the only three lexicons you're ever going to use. Well, you've got Howlot open here, and with Kohlenberger mounts, you simply type in, you can actually right-click, enter command, and you can link it to your lexicon. So now, I'll go ahead and show this to you because it's quick. So now when I triple click on Adam, it's going to change the entry. I actually didn't do that the right way because I set it up backwards. Let's try that one more time. All right, my preferences, I've got my default lexicon as Kohlenberger mounts. So you have to start with your default lexicon. I think we ran into this last time, Linda. That's why it didn't work. It has to be linked a certain way.
Yes.
So if I were to open now, go to my library, type in Howlot, open it here, drag it down so I can see them both at the same time. Now if I type in link or right-click, go to Kohlenberger mounts, push enter. Now when I triple-click on a word, it's going to show up in both places at the same time. So some folks prefer that. That's still my preferred method. I really do use the research feature a lot, and it's great that you can right-click and get at all your lexicons at once. But this, I might know that these two are the only lexicons I'm ever going to start with until I go deeper into word study. So I might just like to have a workspace set up with linked lexicons like this. Let me pause for any other questions or comments or insights to this point.
How did you do that link, please?
Oh, sure. So the first thing, I'll just start, it's worth showing again. Triple click on a word, it's going to open your default lexicon, and maybe you know there's another lexicon you want to open next to it. I wonder if I have no, I don't have that one. I'll just show you with this one again. So then you open from your library, and it will just open a lexicon here that's not linked at all. And so you go to the search entry bar, and you can either right-click, enter command, and select link that way, or you can just start typing link. Now I was typing in Hebrew, but it knew that I wanted link, so it gave me the option there. And you select the right. So then it sets it up for you. You could have typed this in manually if you remember the syntax, but there's no need to. And then push enter to run the search, and then this bottom lexicon is going to follow this top lexicon no matter what word you look up.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And of course, you could do this with more. I mean, maybe you want to open up the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, and so you could do the same thing. There it is. Type in link again. Select it from the drop-down menu, Kohlenberger mounts, and now you've got 3 lexicons, and you could do 4 or 5 and save them in a workspace. I'll show you how to save the workspace in just a minute. But you could set up as many links as you wanted to. Any other questions so far? We're through number 4. What I didn't show you a whole lot of is, again, just to emphasize here this point, that the words' meanings are determined by context. So I didn't spend much time showing you how to search a Hebrew word in a Hebrew text, or I guess we looked at the English text a little bit. But before you get to the lexicons, it's actually worth spending some time on this step, whether you're doing it with an English key text or, better yet, with the Hebrew text itself. Just filtering through the search results of that word in the text and seeing how does this author use this word, how is it used in the Pentateuch, how is it used in the prophets, how is it used across the whole Hebrew Bible. So admittedly, there's a lot more to be said about word study, but I did just want to highlight some basic tools so far. Any other questions?
Abram, could you go back to the Kohlenberger mounts tab in your second zone?
Sure.
And the way that you can search based on your Strong's number through any of those translations, the NIV, the ESV.
Oh, sure.
Would you just choose one of them and show how that searches for whatever word you have there?
Yeah.
City or
ear.
town. Uh-huh.
Yep.
Just,
Yeah, it's great.
yeah, just one
And
click.
again, this is, yep, that's it, and it pulls it right up for you. Now again, what this is, just to get into the technical details a little bit, what this is searching is the key the Hebrew word that has been assigned a key number. So it's possible that you're going to get a different English word besides city. So for example, town, Genesis 19:20. So this is not searching the word town in your ESV Bible. It's searching the word ear in your Hebrew text and pulling up how your ESV Bible translated it. And that's actually an important distinction when you're starting to get into the details with this stuff. However, hovering over town here shows you in the instant details, because this is a keyed text, the NIV here, it shows you the Hebrew that's behind it, as well as the transliteration, because we set that up earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Well, let me show you how to save a workspace, and then I'll stop again and leave the rest of the time. We have the next 10 minutes after this for questions. But let's say that you like what you see here, and you've set this thing up, and maybe you dragged your lexicon down there, and we've got this link search set up, and maybe you don't want to have to remember how to do that later, and maybe you want to keep these search results open. Simply go to Workspaces from the toolbar, and I put this in your handout, so it's already written there for you. Go to Workspaces, add Workspace, and it's going to give you a chance to name it. You'll notice up here at the top of the workspace, it just says Workspace. But if I wanted to call this, I don't know, Hebrew Basic Word Study, type it in. It knows where to save it. You can change where it saves it, actually, but unless you know what you're doing and have a reason to do it, you can just put it in accordance files, which is where I keep mine. It's in your documents. So save it there. And now, not only will it save it there, so you could access it through Finder on the Mac. I mean, you could actually go to Documents / Accordance Files and double-click on the workspace. But once you're in Accordance, go to the same workspace icon, and Temp Hebrew Basic Word Study is going to be there in your list. It will also be listed in your library under your workspaces, which is at the very bottom, My Workspaces. There's Temp Hebrew Basic Word Study, and you'll notice it's renamed it so that it's listed there up at the top. There are other ways too, using the drop-down menus, that you can get to your workspaces, but I think this is probably the simplest way, using this icon in the toolbar, both to save it and then to access it later.
Bill has a question.
Sure.
Bill, you'll have to unmute.
Sorry. In Genesis 19:16, you had that highlighted in yellow.
Okay.
How do you remove? If I opened that up in another version, it would still carry the highlighted for me. How do I change that so once I highlight it, it goes away forever everywhere?
Oh, okay, sure. If you right-click on the verse number and go to Clear Highlight, that will do it for you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Since you're covering workspaces for new people, it may be worth mentioning that to update a workspace, you have to click Add Workspace again. He's just mentioning this.
Right.
It was a helpful tip to him.
Yeah. If you made a change and you wanted to save the change. Yeah, and you could also just save. Now you'll notice this is grayed out because I haven't made any changes. But if I, open up the NRSV in a new tab, that's a simple enough thing that I can just go to save or Command S to save it that way as well.
Yeah, I've got to remember that Command S. After you pointed that out, I've got to remember that because that's handy too. Gordon, did you have a question or a comment or something? and maybe
or a
not.
correction.
Or a
Someone who knows
correction.
No, just
Or a
wanted to see
correction,
what
Gordon.
you're doing.
Okay.
on the
Okay.
Just spying on you.
yeah.
No, nothing special.
Okay. All right.
Doing
Just
a
wanted
good
to
job
make
there.
sure.
Doing a good job.
I have a question
Paul.
about the in the instant details. Do you get predicate and subject and adjunct and complement because you have the syntax tree module?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you don't own that particular module, those will not show for you. If you do, they show up automatically once you adjust your preferences to do it.
Thanks.
Yeah. I actually did not know that for quite a while after having that module. But it is a neat it's a neat integration. You know, those syntax trees, and I think there's a webinar. If it's not the Hebrew syntax, there's a Greek syntax webinar. But they really there's a learning curve. But once you get onto them, they can really enhance your study, particularly of how the words are functioning together. But even if that kind of visual schematic with all the different abbreviations feels overwhelming, it is cool that in the instant details you can just get, hey, this is a predicate, this is an adjunct.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually have to open the thing to see it.
Right. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions? I might take a minute then to simply profess my great affection and appreciation for anything Jewish Publication Society related. This JPS with Strong's translation is excellent. It's not very expensive at all in accordance. If you don't have it, well worth having. I have used this dictionary of Jewish words quite often. That also is not very expensive. The JPS Torah commentary is, in my opinion, the Genesis commentary is not just, well, I can speak in terms of what's my favorite, but also best written. It's not only one of the best things that I've read on Genesis, it's one of the best commentaries that I've read on any book of the Bible. So those, and you're going to get, when you look at that, you're going to get, I'll just give you a little preview here since we've got a couple extra minutes. You're going to get some pretty good insight into, now see here's some transliteration. I'll make this window a little bit bigger. The historical background is certainly covered well here, but you're also going to get some good lexical insight as far as the specific words. Already here, you've got discussion on the word Bereshit. You've got transliterated Hebrew throughout this resource, but it's easy enough. It usually will, in bold, it will give you the English words under consideration. So it's easy enough, regardless of your level of Hebrew, to know what word is being discussed. But Dr. Sarna does quite a good deal of getting to the depths of these words. He does both the Genesis and the Exodus volume, and then the others are excellent as well. So that could be a good companion. Obviously, that's going a lot farther than just word study. But those are helpful companions as you're making your way, especially through the first 5 books. All right.
Keith has a question.
Sure.
Is that different? How's that different from the one that's on sale? Is the one that's on sale a lot more concise, or is it completely just different?
Torah Modern Commentary. Well, and I bet Gordon could speak to these, not to put him on the spot, but yeah, I mean, this is, you're going to get sort of a different flavor of interpretation from each of these. This is more concise, and I mean, in terms of price point, you know, you've got one resource with the 5 books for, I don't know the price off the top of my head, but it's under $75, I want to say, maybe even less than that. And so the JPS commentaries are going to be more in depth, but I have found this one also to be a very useful companion. And I dare say that you could make your way very profitably through the Torah with just this modern commentary as a guide. just fine. So this is well worth picking up as well. I think I was as I made my way through the Genesis portion of this commentary, I was not as blown away as I was by the JPS one, but it's no less good of a resource to use.
Gordon did unmute. Gordon, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. First, I would say Abram has remarks about JPS. I agree wholeheartedly. Nachum Sarna did the first 2 volumes, and others by eminent scholars, Bible scholars. So I agree with that. One of the advantages of the Torah, which was published by the Reform movement in Judaism, it's used in many Reform synagogues in the United States. It has the readings from the prophets that are read every Sabbath. It has comments on that, which you won't find in the JPS. There is a volume of JPS Haftarot, which are the comments on which are the Haftarot, the scriptural readings from the prophets for the Sabbaths and holidays. Unfortunately, not yet available in accordance. But the Torah volume has reference to the Haftarot and some brief comments on these prophetic readings for Sabbaths and holidays. So that's a little advantage there. It also has excurses and gleanings, which are usually from rabbinic sources, which you won't find necessarily in Sarna's books. So it has, the gleanings are very interesting comments from various rabbinic sources, often ethical insights, midrashic insights. So those are very good. Those things are not in the JPS. That is gleanings. JPS does have essays too, which are very comprehensive, very scholarly.
That's right.
And also the Torah has a number of essays too. So can't go wrong with having both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon.
Bill had a question.
Okay.
You need to unmute, Bill. Bill, your mute's on.
Sorry about that. Which one of these in the store is the best package to get started with?
That's a good question. It depends. Well, obviously, it would depend on your budget. I think I think it was Keith who mentioned that the modern commentary, the Torah modern commentary, is on sale now. A really good deal. Let me just pull up the sale page. Here's the Torah modern commentary. There it is, on sale for $39.90, which actually, in my opinion, is a steal. I think I paid full price minus the minister's discount for that. So this, that's definitely worth your $39.90. There's a good, there's a JPS collection. Let me see if I can find it. Well, I guess I could use the search bar. If you're gonna spend a little bit more, and you know that you want this Torah commentary, for example, and the JPS Tanakh, this Torah commentary that we've been talking about is 5 volumes, but you can buy a bundle that includes it. That is the Jewish add-on for biblical studies with JPS materials. That's $2.99, so it's $100 more. But that's going to give you not only this JPS commentary, but you're also going to get the Shocking Bible. You're going to get the Jewish Study Bible. You're going to get this BHS Latin Key. You're going to get a Hebrew text here, another Hebrew lexicon. So this package is a really good one, Jewish add-on for biblical studies. If you already own some of these, you can just go to the custom upgrade button and click that, and it will give you a quote. You're not going to have to buy your resources twice, but you can see here, if you were to add up all these prices shown in the right column, it exceeds the $299. So if you're sort of in it and really want to go deeper with this stuff, this is the bundle that I would recommend.